Let's go, baby. Welcome back to the show. We got the one, the only Liz Moody in the house, best-selling author of the book 100 Ways to Change Your Life. One of the books we're going to be talking about today. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Now, you're the real deal, Liz. Okay, you're the real deal. Now, you've had quite an adventure, okay? You've had quite a journey. You've done some really cool things. You've done some things that have evolved your life. Talk to me about how we got started in the world of personal development, of how it's created a book and podcast empire.
Yes. I guess it started when I was 16 years old. I pitched a newspaper column to my local newspaper. I said you should have a column for teens and a teenager should write it. That teenager should be me. And then that ended up being nationally syndicated. So that sort of launched my career in journalism. But then if we fast forward to about 10 years later, I went through this really intense period with my mental health where I was agoraphobic and I was having panic attacks whenever I left my house. And that's when my journalism began to veer more towards the personal development, but really the wellness. I was asking questions about how I could feel better and how I could be more comfortable in my body and how I could essentially get through each day. And I was emailing experts that I really had no right to email whatsoever, like the head of neuroscience at Stanford and professors of biology at Harvard, and 99% of them did not get back to me, but 1% of them did, which one of my life philosophies is never be the one to say no to yourself, because the answer might be yes, which will come into play, I'm sure, several times in this conversation. But that was one of the biggest examples of that. So I began to piece together this plan to make myself feel better. And then I began sharing that plan because it was so effective with me that I wanted everybody and anybody to know about that. So I shared it with friends and family. And I also began pitching articles and recipes based on the knowledge that I learned with the contacts that I'd made in editorial over the years. And one of the things that I pitched was a series for women's health that was about healthy popsicles. And we did a 5-day series, a bunch of different healthy popsicles. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting idea. I wonder if anybody's written a book about this. And I Googled around and it turns out nobody had. And so then I Googled, how do you write a book proposal? And I found a book proposal on the internet and I copied it exactly in format, just plugged in my own content for every piece of it. And then I Googled, how do you get an agent? And that was my first book. And it was really intentionally designed because at that point, I didn't have an audience. I didn't have a following. So I knew that I needed a book that would be very search friendly, SEO friendly, so that publishers, they could have had anybody write that book, but since I came to them with the idea, they were happy for it to be me. So that sort of kicked off my book journey, and I will stop there in case you have questions on that, or I can keep going.
Keep going, because I want to tie it all in once we get to present day.
Okay, cool. So I wrote that book, and again, the advance wasn't that big. Most of it went to photography. I think that's something a lot of people don't know, is that you're expected to deliver the book in its entirety with your advance. So if that includes photography, like a cookbook, you have to pay for the photography that goes with that book out of your advance. So I didn't make very much money off of it, but I developed a relationship with my publisher, who is Penguin Random House, and specifically Clarkson Potter is an imprint of Penguin Random House that's sort of the prestige cookbook publisher, or at least it was at the time. It was where all of the big names in publishing cookbooks went to publish. And so I got an editor there and I began that whole process. And then as my audience grew and they began to trust me as somebody who could produce work, I was able to pitch my second book, which was called Healthier Together. And so Glow Pops is a single subject book. It's about a single subject, but that's what it's called. And those books tend to be really, really designed for a long tail on Amazon, for searchability, for things like that. And then Healthier Together was way more about a brand and a concept. It was a larger cookbook, so more what you're probably used to picturing. If you picture a cookbook, I got to do a tour for it, which again, publishers do not pay for. But it was definitely more of a significant book. I was able to do press for it. I got a lot of publicity for it. And then I started my podcast as a way to promote Healthier Together, the cookbook, which is so interesting because it's going to come back around full circle. But I was working in editorial at the time, and I kept getting told that I should have a podcast because interviewing is my forte. It's my favorite thing to do. I'm deeply curious about people and I have many, many questions and always like to get to the heart of things. But I started the podcast because I was like, this would be a great way to meet people and a great way to get the word out about my cookbook. And very quickly, it became clear that the podcast was much bigger than the cookbook ever would be. And the podcast over the years has really become the hub of my brand. I was able to leave my editorial full-time job and just do the podcast and my own social media full-time. And then a little bit later, about 2 years ago, I had the idea for a book that was based on the learnings of the podcast. And I love books that you don't need to read straight through, that are almost, I call them like morning routine books, like the Daily
Yep.
Stoic or the Daily Laws or things like that, where you can just read a section and you don't need to read it chronologically. And I wanted to write a book like that that would help people transform their lives and also would really put into play a philosophy that's become big on the podcast, which is that everything works synergistically. It's your gut health impacts your mental health, which impacts how you show up in your relationships, which impacts how you show up at your job, which impacts your mental health, which impacts your gut health. And when we're taking these things individually, we're not going to have the types of results that we really want to see in our lives. So the book has 18 different categories. It has 100 tips. You can read it any which way. And the podcast is littered throughout the book. So if people want to learn more about any specific tip, they can dive back into the podcast. So the book really serves as a resource for podcast listeners and vice versa. They really work together.
Yes. 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 Come on, Liz. Like this is really great here. So I want to touch on a few key points. So you had the niche specific book to start, right? Because you needed to find a way to get in the door that you didn't have some of the things that publishers look for. So you had to find a way to make yourself get the attention of the people who could then make the book happen for you. But then what happened was that started to lead into the next thing. You write your second cookbook, and then that sparks the podcast, right? So your book inspired the podcast, but then the podcast becomes much bigger than the book was. And that podcast that evolved then turned into the next book, which is your most recent book, right?
Yes. Yes.
So here's what I want everyone to take away, just a few things from this that I'm noticing right off the bat. You can turn a book into a podcast to continue to elevate your brand and continue to leverage the existing materials you already have. But you can also use a podcast with all the great material and the audience that you already have to then create a book that audience would already want, which will likely be able to expand to more and more people. So it's really, really powerful what you've been able to do. And it's like your life has come full circle, your podcast comes full circle, but your book journey is also a full circle thing, which I think is really, really fascinating. So I want to know this, Liz, okay? I want to focus a lot on the 100 Ways book, okay? Because I think this is really, really fascinating. Why did you feel that you wanted to really hit more of the short, punchier, 100 different things kind of concept versus maybe just having 18 chapters and then having kind of just, be more, I would say, like less itemized in a way, right? What was your thought process there? Because I love when people do things the way you did it.
A few different things. One, I was listening to a podcast. I believe it was either with Ryan Holiday or Robert Greene. And they were talking about how it was with Ryan Holiday. And he was talking about how the first book that he wrote was a little chunks, like a snippet book, because it was so much easier to write. He just could sit down, write a snippet a day. And I've been a writer for a really long time, but I also knew that I was doing so many other things and I couldn't devote full-time energy to a book. And so the idea of being like, oh, I just sit down every day and write a snippet or two felt really achievable to me and it didn't feel as intimidating. So that was one of the things. Two, attention spans are getting shorter. As somebody whose career is in social media, I'm acutely aware of the fact that a shorter video does better. People lose interest so quickly these days, which is a greater problem. And we have podcast episodes teaching people how to increase their focus. And obviously I don't want that to be the case, but it is the case. So I wanted to give people a book that would really serve them with the attention spans that we have at this moment. So like I hear all the time from new moms who are like, this is the only book that I can actually
Yep.
read because I can pick it up, read for 5 minutes, get something out of it that is complete, and then set it down. And I'm really, really happy to service those people with those needs. And there's one other reason that I forget right now. But yeah, I think it was the ease of writing it, and then also just that that seems to be what people are interested in this moment. And it's a book type that I really gravitate towards as well. I also wanted something that would last a very long time. I read a lot of books for my podcast, and many of them are amazing, and a lot of them you read 200 pages and you say this could have been like a quick snippet, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And I really wanted a book that would pack in a ton of value that nobody would be able to read 200 pages and say this could have been 5 pages. So the best way to do that for me was to make every 2 to 3 pages a full, complete idea unto itself, so people would really feel like they were getting 50 books in one.
And I like the way you approached it because, you know, when I'm looking at it, I got it pulled up here as well. And one of the things that I love that you do and that we encourage a lot of our authors to do is you literally have in the beginning, you say how to use this book. And you kind of explained why you do that, where it's kind of like read it as you go. It doesn't matter the order, pick what you need, read one a day, whatever it is. And I think that that's such an effective way to set the frame because then a reader knows, okay, there's no pressure to read 30 pages in a single moment. I could read 5 pages and get a very clear action item. And that's your whole thing, right? The science behind ways to improve your life. And so, you know, just a couple of these, I got the table of contents right here. Is like, you got do N of 1 experiments. You got think about your death. You got, you know, do micro workouts for mega benefits. I mean, you got so many different things within these segments. And so what I would like to know though is, did you take these ideas, these 100 ideas, were they all ideas that came from guests on your show, or were they things that you personally decided to implement based on larger topic conversations?
Yeah, I'll answer that in a second, but I do want to speak to the front matter bit a little bit because I think that might be helpful to your listeners or to anybody writing a book. And it really surprised me, which is that section, the how to use this book section, is hands down the most commented on section that I get feedback from my audience, that they're like, thank you so much for including this. This is so helpful. I so appreciate it. And with Healthier Together, which was the cookbook book that I wrote before it, I kind of wrote the front matter for both the books. It's almost like an afterthought, like, oh, let me just like include a little bit of prologue, let me include a little bit of instruction, and it continues to be the most commented on thing. And I think that people are really eager for more of a roadmap than many people are giving them within books, and more guidance so that you're not having the decision fatigue of figuring out how to consume a book on top of actually consuming the book. So that was a big lesson for me. And I would definitely recommend people include something similar in any type of book they do, particularly if they're playing around with a style that is a little bit more out of the norm. But most books these days, I think, don't need to be like sat down and read the whole way through. You know what I mean? So I think that's really helpful. In terms of the tips themselves, what I did is once I had the idea, I pulled up every transcript for every single podcast that I had ever recorded. And I said, what are the key takeaways from these episodes? What are the really meaty points? And particularly, what's the really interesting science that correlates with an actual action step you can take? Because the book is a book of 100 action steps. It's not just, well, you can do it, or like, think about this. It's like, no, here's something you can do today to change your life. So everything had to correlate with that. I made a greater list of all of those things. I divided that into categories. And then I said, what am I missing? What are the places people are going to fall down or run into problems, or this area doesn't feel complete? And then I would reach out to former guests, to researchers, to scientists, to doctors to fill in tips in those areas to make sure that we had a really holistic picture of how you could change your life. And then I sat down and I wrote the tips from there using quotes from the podcast as a starting place. But then I would also reach out to primary sources and to other source material as well.
I mean, I love how you just boil it down, right? Like you really just did such a great job of leveraging what you had, filling in the gaps, tapping into your journalism background, and then executing on things that you know people wanted, and that also I got to imagine this part, that you enjoyed sharing too, right? Because I assume, and please tell me if I'm incorrect here, but that you practice most, if not all of these at some point or another in your life.
So that's a really interesting thing that you said, and it's been a journey for me. I think when I was going on book tour, there was times where I felt like a little bit of an imposter because I was going up in these rooms in front of hundreds of people, and they would all come up to me afterward and tell me how my book or my podcast had changed their lives. And I, at that moment, didn't feel the impact of my work on my own life in that same way.
Interesting.
And it's been a real journey over the last 6 months, really, where I've started to implement even more of the tips and tools that I was sharing. I've come out from being underwater, working on the book a little bit, and I've done a lot of work on my mental health, but the work that I've done on my mental health has been with the tools that I shared in the book. So two things. One is I don't think that you need to be living a perfect life to be able to help people. And I think that's really, really important for people to internalize. And I also think that tips and tools and tricks will find you when you need them. And so it's one of the things I say with my book is like, you don't need to read all 100 tips and implement them immediately. That would be insane. But keep it out on your coffee table. It's like bright and beautiful and good to keep out. And then when you need them, you can rely on these tips and they can begin to change your life. I feel the same about podcasts. I think we can listen to them and that's so great, but we don't need to berate ourselves if we're not immediately doing all of the things in those podcasts. It'll be in there. And then when we need it, we will have it there and we'll be able to pull that up. So I have used many, many more of the tips. I would say I tried every single one.
Right.
I implemented a certain amount. I was very confident in the science behind every single thing in the book, but more recently I've had an even more transformative relationship with the tips, and that's been even more satisfying.
Yeah, and that's and I appreciate that answer because you're not going to do all 100 at every given time, right? And like that would be impossible. That would be all of your days, and then you'd start to create even more panic because you're like, I can't actually do any of them because I'm trying everything. I'm going to take a side note from the book conversation here. I want to dig into something here because I think you'll have a very interesting take. Do you think that people in the personal development space, the growth mindset space, sometimes try to overdo some of the basics or some of the things because it's constantly an information overload, and so you try to do too many things without actually digging deep into the things that move the needle, that actually matter?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And it's why there's 3 tips, and you'll see in the how to read this book section. Please read the first 3 tips. And then after that, you can skip around. But one of those 3 tips is figure out your why. And I think that is so, so important for any habit or tool that we're using our precious time, energy, or money on, is we need to have a direct reason for that. And that why is going to change over different periods of time. For me, when I was agoraphobic, my why was I need to get out of bed. I need to feel more comfortable in my body so that I don't feel like ending my life on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But my why now is I need to have the energy to do the job that I have taken on that's gotten bigger and more intensive and more demanding. I need to have the calm and the space to enjoy the life that I've created for myself. So my why is changing all the time, but I'm really cognizant of what that why is at any moment. And if I'm ever doing anything that does not align with a why, then I'm questioning why I'm doing that.
Come on, Liz. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. I knew that was a question that you would have a great answer to. Okay. I need to talk about the publishing side of the business and actually the process of the book. Okay. Is this the same publisher that did this book versus the cookbooks? If not, how did that shift happen? And is it underneath the same overall entity, or is it completely different?
It's completely different. So many books, your publisher will sign and get an option on your next book, which means that they get the right to see it first and refuse it or take it on. And you can refuse their offer. It's not a 2-book deal, but they have the right to see it first. So I believe that Potter had that for my books, but and I just went to them with Healthier Together. That was like the easy choice from Glow Pops. But they're a cookbook imprint. They don't really do this type of book. And so it was a pretty easy decision. Similarly, my agent was largely a cookbook agent. So I went and got a completely different agent, and I had a bunch of different calls and was doing interviews with them. And then we went out widely to basically all of the editors that she thought would be a good fit. And then it went to auction and there was an auction on it, which doesn't always happen, but it's great when it does because then the different publishers bid each other up and your
Yep.
advance gets higher. And then we chose HarperCollins and specifically Harper Wave, which was an imprint within HarperCollins. Ironically, actually, or maybe not ironically, but they bid on Glow Pops years prior, and they do cookbooks and other types of books in the personal development space.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went with them.
Okay, great. Now, a lot of people that are listening to this are trying to understand and learn what's the best path for them to take to get their book out. Okay. We at Big Idea to Bestseller, we offer the services for people, but they get to keep 100% ownership of their book, the rights, the royalties, which is a very different model than the traditional publishing. What I hear most often from people, okay, of why they want a traditional deal, whether they have an audience or not, is they go, I want a publishing deal because I get a huge advance. I get to keep all of that money. I get to keep all that money. This is what people say. I want to get a huge advance. They think they keep all of that money. Okay. And then they believe the publisher is the one who's going to market the book and sell their book for them. So what I would love to know is, and we don't need to go into how much your advances were or anything like that. But what I would love to know is just kind of a general, like what are the myth busts that we should have so that we could set the proper expectations for knowing what direction is best for our future books.
Right. So your advance is, I would say 90% contingent on your audience size. So you're looking at a good sized advance probably if you have a really huge audience, but also if you have a really huge audience, you're going to make more by selling directly to that audience than you are by sharing that with the publisher. So you get your advance. I got a 6-figure advance. I was happy with it. But it was probably the least profitable way I could use the amount of time that I spent doing the book. If I had spent that time doing most other facets of my business, I would have made more money, surely because it is such an incredible demand on time. And out of that, you're paying for PR. So the publishers have a PR and marketing team, but these days they're really, really overstretched budgetarily and just in terms of the amount of people. So you have one person working on many, many books, and they're gonna help with some stuff, but they really expect you at this point, particularly if you have a book that you're getting any decent sized advance, to bring in your own outside PR team to supplement that. And if they're doing PR, it's like a piece, a placement here, a placement there. But really what book buyers are buying these days, and I think people need to be far clearer about this, is not an idea, it's an audience. They're not interested in an idea. They like the idea to be good once you have an audience, but an idea alone saying, oh, I have this great thing that's going to help so many people, they don't have the resources at this point to turn an idea into a bestseller. They need you to bring the ability to turn it into a bestseller. So I think that's a huge myth about the publishing world. So you're bringing in your outside PR, you're usually paying for different types of marketing. They do some stuff. So they'll do book sends. They'll send it out to different influencers and editorial people. They often have contacts at the big morning shows or some different magazines and things like that. So I did get some things through them, but I got far more from having a dedicated team, and I'm paying for that. And so you eat into your advance that you get. I say that you should not write a book for the money. No person I know, I take that back. I know one person. I have one girlfriend who wrote a book that is huge. You see it at like every single airport. It's one of those anomaly, Atomic Habits types level books. She makes really good money from her book. But I have friends who are best-selling authors who write a New York Times bestseller every year, and they're still making fine money. Okay, buddy, but they're not making great money from it. It's not, I don't think you should write a book for the money.
Why do you think you should write a book?
I think it's the world's biggest business card. So I think the prestige and the credibility in the book world is still very much there. It's opened doors for me to say first that I had books published by Penguin Random House, and now that I have books published by HarperCollins. It's helped me gain credibility in my business that I would have had to work harder, I think, to find in other ways. Also for me, I've wanted to be a published author since I was 5 years old. I thought I was going to be a novelist for a really long time. My dream was to be sort of like Miranda Priestly, but a nice version of her in The Devil Wears Prada, and then write novels on the side. And I've had to sort of reconfigure my career, both through my own mental health crises and as the editorial world has changed so much in the last 10 years. So and the book world has too. And I think that's something that people don't talk about enough. I think maybe 10 years ago, there was more money there. And I just don't think there's the same amount of money anymore. And if there is that money, it is because you are bringing them millions of people through your own audience. And that's what they're buying, is they're buying your audience.
Can you, and please let me know what you can and cannot share, but you know, when you go and you learn a little bit more about the traditional publishing world, a lot of times there's talk about rights and royalties. Right. And this is a big conversation that a lot of people don't know what it's like, because it's almost like you can Google some stuff, but there's a lot of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Right. And publishing is an older industry. It's
Yeah.
been around forever. Books have been around forever. And there's always one way to do things. Now, there are multiple ways to do things. I'm curious, from your experience and from a lot of your friends who have been traditionally published, what have you found to be the way that publishers do for rights or royalties? What percentage are they taking for the different versions of your books?
I am not the best person to ask about that, because one of the things you are paying for is having an agent who is negotiating all of those things in your contract for you. I do know that 99% of books never pay out past their advance. So you get that advance up front, which you use to pay for your marketing. Most of the people I know spend their entire advance in the process of writing, creating, and publishing the book. But you only get money on top of that advance if you sell a lot of copies, which again, I have a few friends who have done. We're about to hit that point with Healthier Together 4 or 5 years in. So it takes a very long time. And then you start to get like $1 a book or something that.
So can you clarify this for everyone who's understanding what this means? You get an advance.
Yes.
But you are not making money on your book until you reach that amount of sales.
Yeah.
And then you start to get a royalty on every book after the advance has been recouped by the publisher. Is that, can you elaborate on that for people who are who are newer to that way of thinking?
Yeah. So just putting it in really simple math as an example, if you got $100,000 advance and your contract made it so that you got $1 a book, which is, these are just fake numbers, but let's say that's it. And they're not that far off from what might be the case. Then you would have to sell 100,000 books before you would get a single dollar. And then after you sold 100,000 books, which is a lot of books, you start getting $1 per book sold.
Yes. And that's a huge thing, right? Because sometimes like, oh, I'd love this advance, right? But then you're like, wait a sec, I'm spending most of this to do my own promotions, and I have to now wait to get any more money until we've recouped that. So now I've gotten money, I've spent it, and now I'm not making money off that until a certain point.
Yeah. And again, 99% of books don't pay out their advance. So you get the advance no matter what, which is why you want to get a big advance. You want to get a big advance for 2 reasons. One, because for many people, that's the only money you're going to make from your book, but also because the bigger your advance is, the more your publisher treats your book like it's a really big book. So they're going to put the marketing, PR, editorial, all the resources that they can behind that book, because they need to recoup more money as well. So it kind of signifies, like, a big thing when we were shopping my book around to publishers was I wanted a publisher who would be like, this is our big book for fall and the book that we're going to put all of our weight behind. And that was important to me.
I love it. Okay, I got one big final question here, and then I want to make sure everyone can get a copy of your book or your latest book. They get all of the books if they want, but your latest book specifically. What for you in your life today, at this moment, at the time of the recording, is one of your favorite science-based action items that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever you want to share? What is your current favorite that's bringing you the most results or enjoyment?
Ooh, that's such a good question. My husband bought a cold plunge while I was on a work trip recently. So I came home and there was a cold plunge and I was like, what are you doing? That's so expensive, but we've been talking about it for like 6 months. So that's actually been really fun. I've been loving it. But I would say micro habits, and micro habits show up in a number of different ways in my book and in my podcast, but it's the idea that you don't need to set aside these larger chunks of time. You can really make a big difference in your psychology and your physiology quickly. So I incorporate a ton of different micro habits in my day. One is every hour I'm doing some sort of physical movement, whether it's like 5 squats, a walk around the block, something like that, to keep my blood sugar stable, to keep my mental health in as good of a place as possible, to keep my creativity high. There's a lot of research behind these micro bursts of movement. That's a big one I do. I also do micro meditations. I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to sit down and do like the 20-minute meditation. And now whenever I have like 5 minutes between meetings, I'll just close my eyes and think about a mantra or my breath. And that's been really helpful for me as well. And then I want to shout out another one that I've been loving recently, which is just you start your day like you're going to be a detective for things you're going to appreciate at the end of your day. So you do an appreciation practice at the end of the day, which is things that like really stood out, were beautiful, were wonderful, you're grateful for, all of those types of things. But then knowing you're going to do that, and this is from Michael Gervais, who's an incredible performance psychologist, you start your day as a detective looking for those things. And by looking for those things, you're going to highlight them more in your life, and you're going to have just you'll bring more of it into your life. And I've felt a noticeable difference in my happiness on a day-to-day basis since I've been doing that.
Damn. I love the answer you just gave so much. We could have a whole episode just digging into micro habits alone. I love that stuff. And I think it's really powerful sharing that. And so how can we get one or all of your books? Tell us where to go. How can we listen to your podcast? How do we get more Liz Moody in our lives?
So I'm Liz Moody on all social channels. I share little tidbits and easy ways you can change your life. And then I'm the Liz Moody podcast. That interview with Dr. Michael Gervais is a great place to start. It's 5 Secrets of the World's Most Successful People. Yep. It's a great episode. And then my book is called 100 Ways to Change Your Life. And you can buy that anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, all of that. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it, really helping people change their lives. And I'm so grateful to be part of people's journey.
Yeah, you're doing some great work. I'm so glad that we've gotten to know each other a little bit and that we get to continue to get to know each other. This is awesome. You're great. I want everyone to get the book. And so for everyone that just listened to this, we end every episode here with a challenge. And my challenge for everyone who just listened to this is to find one micro habit that you can implement into your life. Okay, you don't need to do 100 different things, but pick one. And if you need some ideas, I know a book that will be great for you. Okay.
Can I add a challenge?
Please add a challenge.
I think this will be good for your listeners, which is the find your why. I think really applies to all parts of our lives, but the publishing world as well. So I think there's a lot of great whys to publishing a book in a traditional path. And I think there's a lot of great whys to publishing a book in the way that you publish books. And I would challenge people to really think about the why behind the choices that they're making or the goals that they're setting for themselves.
There you have it. Mic drop. That's the end of this episode. Fire me up. Everybody grab Liz's books, check her out on social, listen to her podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Peace.